Okay, so what if our biggest, most fundamental ideas, we're talking freedom, justice, even democracy itself, aren't just things philosophers came up with, but are actually born from a biological war that's happening inside our own heads every single day? The science on this is absolutely wild, and it really forces you to rethink who you are from the inside out. You know that feeling, right? One part of you is screaming, "Eat the donut," while the other is begging you to stick to your diet. Or when the alarm goes off, and one part of you is like, "Just 5 more minutes," while the other is panicking, "Get up, you're gonna be late." Well, that internal struggle, it's totally universal. And, as it turns out, it might just be the key to, well, everything. So here's how neuroscientists see it. They picture this constant tug-of-war happening inside your brain between two very different players. On one side, you've got the planner. That's your rational, future-looking self, the one focused on what you should do. And on the other side, that's the reactor. It's your impulsive, instinct-driven self that's all about what you want to do, right now.
Now, this isn't just about small decisions like choosing a salad over fries. The big idea here is that the outcome of this constant internal battle, when you scale it up across millions and millions of people, might actually form the blueprint for our societies. It's a massive idea, so let's get into the science and break it down.
All right, let's properly introduce these two competing systems inside your head. Because this core conflict, this planner versus reactor, it defines so much of who we are.
So your planner lives right up front, in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain just behind your forehead. You can think of it as your brain's CEO in the executive suite. It's the newest part of our brain, evolution-wise, and it's in charge of all that top-down control. Thinking about the future, controlling impulses, and making smart, long-term choices.
And your reactor? Well, that lives deep down inside, in the older, more primitive parts of the brain. We're talking about the subcortical systems, the brain's engine room. These are the ancient regions that generate all our bottom-up drives: fear, hunger, desire, all our ingrained habits. They are incredibly fast, super powerful, and honestly, they could not care less about your 5-year plan.
So what happens when the planner gets taken offline? Well, the tragic and true story of a railroad worker named Phineas Gage gives us a really chilling answer. An explosion sent an iron rod straight through his head, destroying much of his prefrontal cortex. Miraculously, he survived, but his personality? It was gone. He became impulsive, profane, and completely unable to stick to any plan. His reactor was left totally in charge with no one at the wheel.
And the story of Phineas Gage perfectly illustrates this really cool concept. We usually think of free will as the power to do something, but a lot of neuroscience suggests it's actually more about free won't. The power of your prefrontal cortex, your inner CEO, to slam on the brakes and veto an impulse coming from the reactor. Self-control is, quite literally, your brain's CEO saying, "Yeah, nope, we're not doing that."
Okay, so if this inner battle between the planner and the reactor shapes our personal choices, what happens when we scale it up to society? If our individual heads are a battleground between impulse and reason, does that exact same battle play out in our politics? Let's take a look at what the research suggests.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating, but I have to be super clear here. We're talking about statistical correlations, just averages across large groups. This is not destiny, okay? So, some studies have found that, on average, people who identify as more liberal tend to have a larger anterior cingulate cortex. That's a part of the brain that's really good at noticing when things conflict, and it helps you tolerate ambiguity. On the other hand, those who identify as more conservative tend to have, on average, a larger and more reactive amygdala, which is basically the brain's threat detector. Again, I have to stress this, it's just a correlation. It doesn't mean your brain structure determines your political beliefs, but it does suggest we might have different default sensitivities.
And the research gets even more specific when you look at authoritarian mindsets across the whole political spectrum. For instance, higher scores in right-wing authoritarianism have been correlated with less gray matter in a part of the prefrontal cortex that's crucial for mental flexibility and trying to see the world from someone else's perspective. And on the other end, extreme left-wing authoritarianism has been correlated with a thinner cortex in a region called the right anterior insula, which is a key hub for empathy and feeling our own bodily states. But, and this is the most important part, look at the caveat. Correlation is not causation. Our brains are plastic. They change based on our experiences, conversations, and choices. This is just a snapshot, not a life sentence.
So all of this science naturally leads us to one of the biggest, oldest questions in philosophy, but now it's supercharged with all this new brain data. If our choices are just the outcome of a biological tug-of-war, what does that even mean for the idea of free will?
Seriously, think about that for a second. If we could map every single one of your neurons and perfectly predict whether your planner or your reactor was going to win the next battle, are you still making a free choice? Or are you just a spectator watching a biological movie unfold inside your own head?
This whole question basically splits thinkers into two big camps. You've got the determinists, who argue that, yeah, free will is basically a beautiful illusion. Your choices are just the predetermined result of biology and your environment. But then you have the compatibilists, and they have a totally different take. They say, wait a minute, free will isn't some magic power or a ghost in the machine. Free will is that amazing biological skill, the ability of your planner, your rational self, to weigh reasons and take control of your actions. It's not magic, it's a real biological capacity. Okay, so let's bring all this home. Let's tie it all together. If free will is this incredible skill of self-governance happening inside our skulls, what happens when we try to build a system of self-governance for an entire society?
Just look at this powerful analogy. Inside your head, you've got the prefrontal cortex, your planner, working to regulate all those primal impulses for your own long-term good. Now look at a democratic society. What are we trying to do? We, the citizens, are trying to use reason, laws, and deliberation to regulate our collective primal self-interest for the greater good of the whole community. It's the same pattern. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? A democratic society is like a collective attempt to put our shared prefrontal cortex, our capacity for reason, debate, empathy, and long-term planning, in the driver's seat. It's an effort to govern ourselves by reason rather than letting our collective amygdala, our raw impulses of fear, tribalism, and knee-jerk reactions run the whole show.
So, here's the bottom line, the main takeaway from all of this. Freedom, whether we're talking about your personal free will or a society's political freedom, isn't some magical switch that's just on or off. It's a biological skill. It's this difficult, fragile, and frankly incredible achievement of our highly evolved brains learning how to regulate their own primitive impulses.
And that, of course, leaves us with one last profound question to think about. If freedom, both personal self-control and collective self-governance, is a skill rooted in our neurobiology, what does it take to get better at it? How do we as individuals and as a society practice and strengthen this incredible, fragile skill? How do we build better brains and by doing that, build a better world?